We'll get into it. Let me just get my notes up. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the WoAS podcast. I am Mike Ledoux and my co-host Jeramy Dillon. We are here and excited because we have a special treat for everyone that may be watching or listening today. And that would be a gross understatement. We have someone who I would consider a theatrical storyteller of unhinged originality and imagination. For all you fans of music, but also of shock rock, psychedelic, theatrical, and prog rock. Today, we are joined by none other than the god of Hellfire himself, Arthur Brown.
Oh, yeah.
All right, and fade that out. Hello, Mr. Brown. Welcome. How are you today?
Oh, exceptionally good. We've had a period of rain and there's some sunshine today. So, yeah, feeling good.
Beautiful. A precious commodity in England. Yes, sunshine. That is.
It depends. Every part of England seems to get a different weather nowadays. So,
right.
Some places get more than others.
Fair enough.
As usual.
But you know, if you have the tea that binds, it'll keep the sun shining on the inside. All right, sorry, I like puns. I apologize.
I can recommend this to any vocalist or any lawyer connected to a band that has to spend a lot of this tea will enable you to perform wonders.
Excellent. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to take your word for it because your voice has held up amazingly well over the decades. And if you're attributing it to the tea, we all need to know what it is.
Yeah, no, it has held up. And I think certainly, in a way, it's learning how to be able to do those things that if you do them wrongly will tear your throat out. And if you do them in a relaxed way, you can just keep doing, and also keeping the breath going and the blood flowing into the brain and the spirits, balancing out with everything that's going on.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that a lot of people who have tried to sing out of their range or what they think is their range have probably had that misfortune. I know I have, where before you really know how to sing properly, you'll kind of yell to try to just physically reach that note, and you can almost cause yourself to pass out.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that.
and you can strain the muscles and get polyps and all sorts of things as a result of it. Yeah.
Have you successfully avoided any sort of mishaps of that nature over the years?
The kind of worst thing that I've had happened to the voice is occasion, sore throats and things like that. But I've not lost it.
That's very impressive. Yeah.
Well, it also. It's a question of, learning how to really relax when you're singing, and that's to do mainly with breathing.
Okay, yeah,
and to keep up the kind of quantity of air that you can actually get into your lungs.
Yeah,
I've got. Last time I did the chest X-ray, they had to use 2 pictures in order to get it all in, because I'm not like that size. I'm that size, but my lungs are long.
Okay.
So when they take photo of mine, they have to use 2 shots, whereas normal people just 1 shot.
Interesting.
But that gives the all the capacity in there for oxygen, which keeps the brain ticking, and all the other things. Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe your projection and everything else. Maybe that's part of your tonal character. It's all that air coming out of your lungs, you know? Oh, long
Yeah,
lungs
well,
Brown over here.
yeah, well, and also because of that, and because I like dancing as well and moving and singing in positions that most people wouldn't sing in, it enables me to get tones on the voice. Like if you turn and I do the same voice that I'm speaking to in, and then I sit up correctly, the whole voice changes as you move.
Sure.
So usually with say like a classical singer, they will stand still, keep the spine straight, and and that's a pure tone. Right. And they won't go into any
right.
and the moves that give energy just by themselves as well.
Yeah.
So it's there are different kind of disciplines in whatever kind of music you're singing. Sometimes I do stand still.
Yeah. Did you have any training at all in singing in your early days, or did you just come about this whole science yourself?
What I did was I started off singing blues and some jazz and old English music hall songs, and I took up playing bass when the university band bass player was sent down, and so I just went out and bought a bass and said, "I'm your bass player. Where shall I put my fingers?" But I also then people liked it, but I soon realized, well, I actually don't have a big voice. I don't have the voice that I would like to hear coming out of this. So I did take classical training for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, with that was when I was at Reading University, and it was with a man who physically was very tall, enormous. His lungs were, and when I stood next to him and sang, at the beginning, his voice was like a mountain, and mine was like a little shrew.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And so he gave me all these exercises, and I did a lot of it. I didn't have well, there was a room I could play in the student union, and I could play the piano and sing and practice my screams and things like that. But a lot of time there were people in other rooms quite close. And, when I was sort of screaming and they were trying to do contract law or something like that.
Real exciting stuff.
So what I used to do was go out and walk up and down the main road, lots of traffic, and nobody could hear me, and I'd be see, that's when I sound like a jet plane going over the top. They come very close to you. No, and so I because some of the practice was holding quite loud notes. It needed something like that to drown it out.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
And my other method was putting 5 sweaters over my head.
Okay.
And you can still, stand.
Right. And good way to get in touch with your internal vibration, just by kind of locking it in there. Yeah, and that makes sense too. So the classical training, you would consider that like that would be touching sort of operatic type of singing. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
or like
and
technique?
light classical and classical, and the scales, of course, and
Mhm. Yeah.
And all of those bouncing techniques and everything, which you later, of course, when I was singing with mod bands and
Mhm.
other sort of R&B bands and things, you have to forget most of that because
Yeah.
it makes I was a going, hey baby,
Yeah.
I love you. And you can hear some of the opera singers when they're singing rock, they sound very, it's not quite there.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you have to learn how to let it flow out differently.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Or,
and
or you
you,
pick your battles, right? Like when it's going to happen, when you're going to sort of do the
yes,
more operatic thing, like
yeah,
yourself and also Tom Jones are, I think, good examples of that, of like knowing when to kind of place it.
oh yeah, and be guided by your manager to what Tom's manager used to call, now Tom, when you get to this point, remember next is coming the money note. And you have
Gotta
to
hit
hit
that
that
one.
long note that has a round sound and
Yeah.
just is powerful and beautiful, and it never seems to stop for
Right.
a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's still smiling,
Right. Yeah.
and I think he's a prime example of someone who really loves singing,
Yeah.
really loves it,
Yeah.
and he'll sing it at the drop of a hat,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that's really lovely because practicing you don't have to do because you're doing it all the time anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing
Like
better than singing really long, loud notes in front of people. I don't know what it is, but it's this expression that seems very pure. I'm not a great singer, but there's
he's
something
lying. He is.
about that feeling
Can you
that's
can you sing
unmatched.
a long round note now, please?
Right now?
All right,
Yeah,
Jeremy. Pressure's on, buddy.
there you go. Oh.
I could keep going. I could have kept going, but
All right.
for the sake of brevity here.
I'll take a stab too, but I'll cheat because we were just talking about Tom
Oh
Jones.
yeah, lovely.
Why, Delilah?
Beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. When Tom can't sing anymore, he'll call you up. Don't worry.
There we go. Okay. Oh boy. I don't know if I can wear that, leisure suit and do it justice.
Oh.
I don't have the chest hair for it.
Right. There you go. Or the medallion.
Yeah.
The medallions.
Yes.
Yes.
the fashion choices that probably are going to be back in vogue soon enough anyway. We're varied from your day until now. It's crazy. So some interesting things to I think kind of segue into. I think it may be just kind of fun, this little background of how we connected. Jeremy and I were doing the podcast, and we were talking about somehow a documentary came up where Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden was talking about his singing style, and he was admittedly, saying that he's like, basically everything I do is Arthur Brown, and we had a video about that, and Arthur and Claire, I think, came across that, and we got a conversation going, and here we are, which thank you for humoring us in that effort. But also it kind of made me think about, your hierarchy of influence, in the sense that I would say that there are people through today, but recent enough examples even that I have, where I think they are utilizing your spirit and singing style and don't know it. And Jeremy and I were discussing this last night and trying to sort of like do a little hierarchy tree of maybe what begat what, but some interesting names came up. I had noticed, I was listening to Long Long Road, fantastic album, and what a Herculean sort of presentation for something that was done so recently and is so sort of tied to the energy and spirit of your first album, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. So thanks for making that, for starters. But I was listening to Going Down, and in that song you're particularly really going for it and running the whole gamut of your like range of octaves. And I remember at one point sitting there and going like, oh my God, Rob Halford from Judas Priest sounds exactly like him. Like, wow, you know. But then, you know, I remember when I was a teenager and I'm listening to this group Pantera, which I don't know if you're familiar with or not, but they kind of became more of like a screaming kind of thrash metal band. But in their early stages, he's mimicking Rob Halford and is doing that same sort of operatic high note kind of delivery. So it's interesting because, you know, I wonder if artists like, his name is Phil Anselmo, if artists like that are cognizant of the sort of the lineage, you know, that they came from. But Jeremy had brought up Steve Marriott as an example as well. And
yeah, all these guys that were these great singers from the 60s, like yourself, who have this influence that maybe people don't understand how influential they are. That, like yourself, Steve Marriott, with his influence on Robert Plant, and people all the way down to like Chris Robinson, Black Crowes, and those legacies go on and on and on. And it's interesting to look back and see where those things come from.
Yeah, well, I would say there is a kind of an influence that goes out because you hear records, you go and see concerts, and wow, I could do that maybe, and then you go off and do it, you know. And it's like that for all those singers as well, Stevie Marriott and all of that. Where did they get theirs from? And it's a sort of never-ending going back to, for instance, if you look rhythmically at blues styles, you can take, say, Howling Wolf. I did it actually once because I was doing a class. I was teaching a class on history of, you know, modern music and everything.
Oh, interesting.
And I was actually where a lot of it came from was I went to live in Africa for a while, and that was in Burundi, and the older musicians are still there playing the old instruments and singing in different styles, and the rhythms. If you go around a series of villages, you get each has a different favorite rhythm, you know. And if you look at Howling Wolf, he's got the Rocking Chair blues album that he brought out probably in 1962 or something like that. And you can hear the different village styles in there. You know, and so he's been walking around or going around or heard people visiting, and and the thing about Howling Wolf is he was able to play all of them, and yeah, definitely, and of course vocally very, very influential on all the young blues singers and the rock singers as well.
Sure.
You know, people like Eric Burden, who is himself, you know, quite an amazing vocalist.
Yes. Yeah.
and a very early rock person. And so mine goes through all the old blues guys. And now, of course, I have favorite ones. And there's the line of the old blues guys that are the big blues shouters. Hey, baby, come back. You know, it's a big sound, and you have to have lungs to do it and everything, and you have to not be
amplifiers.
Yeah.
That's why they're just shouting.
Yeah,
to get us over the
through
crowd.
the band.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it may also be a like an interpretation thing too, because to me, when I hear what you were doing then and doing now as well, still it's still very unique, but especially at the time. And then I hear like Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, same thing, where he's hitting these notes, and I'm just like, number one, that's impressive, but number two, that must scare the shit out of people, listening to pop music, just like some like the
Yes.
throw the tea up in the air, like what the hell, because it is significantly more aggressive and piercing and in a fun musical way than
Yes.
some of what like maybe the blues originators were doing. It's like a beautiful exaggeration of that. So I like, did a lot of people get like jump out of their skin that from your point of view when you would be delivering that kind of notation to them?
Well, if it was in a small jazz clubs, folk clubs and stuff were around, all of those forms were being explored at the same time when I was learning, and so if you were doing it in that setting, then you might have other people singing English folk songs acoustically, and of course this would be louder because it some of it comes from the work ethic and the work songs and the chants that people were doing when they were working out in the fields and stuff.
Right.
And you just, there's so much room and space, you have to sing loud to fill it up if you can.
And maybe the generational pain and all that kind of stuff too. There's like a lot of emotion in it as well, feeling that. So in the time and place, speaking on perception and whatnot, where Crazy World of Arthur Brown is roughly maybe 56 years old now. Is that accurate?
53. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm bad at math. Sorry. But I mean, wow, what a legacy, and congrats on that's still being a landmark moment in time and piece of music. And thank you on behalf of the musical world for creating that. Of course, Jeramy and I were also discussing this last night, and we were curious about your thoughts on the perception of you in that scene. So to kind of put a little framework around it, in your interview with Ian McNulty, I learned a lot about your role and placement within the scene. All these people that were your peers, like Jimi Hendrix, Pete Townshend, Robert Fripp. Correct me wherever I'm wrong, because there's a lot of things I gleaned from that interview and some other things I got from Wikipedia about the Small Faces, maybe the Doors. But more importantly, let's say, as far as looking at your style and your presentation, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, maybe Captain Beefheart, right? I think there was a lot of bold, experimental, brutally original stuff happening, which is amazing. And I couldn't imagine that happening in pop music today on that level. Did you sort of share a sense of community with artists like Frank Zappa and maybe Don Van Vliet, or were you all sort of these aliens to everyone? Because I got to imagine it was very, because of the theater of it, which is beautiful, but again, it's not what everyone else was doing. So was everyone like, oh, this is an interesting play, I'm really into the visual aspect of this and the sound, or did you confuse a lot of people? We're very curious as to sort of, what it was from your perspective from, let's say, 67 onward in the business, and even amongst your peers as well.
Well, of course, the peers, like you, if you look at, there was the mod singers were there at the beginning of it. The blues people, there were folk people, there were classical people, particularly the English underground, which had the Floyd, the Soft Machine, as well as ourselves, and then a whole bunch of other people that later became more prominent, like Mark Bolan,
personal favorite.
And Bowie himself, he wasn't there right at the beginning, but he did come in later, and so there was a whole lot of different scenes became joined into one, the psychedelic scene. And so, but you had still all those other people from the scenes that they grew up in, or gained their success in, was still there, and they a lot of them kind of molded themselves after the underground had been going for about 3 or 4 years. We had suddenly the 14-hour Technicolor Dream, or the certain of the ones that made it more public, and then all these bands, having heard it, so you can do that. We'll do our version of that, and the whole psychedelic thing became part of pop music, which was sort of had its peak in a way with Sergeant Pepper, of course.
Yeah.
So that was around the Beatles as well, and with the fact that, say, songs like the Beatles, in My Life, with that turning away to a more interior look at life.
Yeah.
What's going on inside me, and how do I, what's my judgment of life, and so all of that fed into the underground stuff. So you had the tradition through the Beatles of the songwriting, and of course through the folk thing as well. And then you had the Stones with the R&B, and also their take on folk airs.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, when I came suddenly out of that, it was like I arrived in the bands that had spent their lives aiming at the hit parade.
Okay. Yeah.
Suddenly I was one of those for a lot of people, and they couldn't understand, how did this kind of music get in there? How was that a hit in, except, and some people said, no, it's a novelty record. It's a novelty record. You don't have to try and find a meaning in it. It's some guy with a bit of flames coming out of his head.
Yeah.
Paint on his face, and a silly robe, and some, and I do remember Frank Zappa saying to me, Arthur, this was in 1976.
Okay.
One of his, hallmark production things.
Yeah.
And so he said, of course that was a very successful album, but you made a bad mistake. And I said, what are you talking about, Frank? And he said, well, you come on, and on the video too. He said, when you came on with that flame on your head, you should have had a child in there saying, Mummy, why has that man got that silly flame coming out of his head? As part of your recording, And I said, well, that's how you do it, Frank.
Right. Yeah.
But,
Oh, yeah.
for
Totally.
Me,
Yeah.
Because we also, the Crazy World was also, say, 50% improvised, for one thing. All the music, we made stuff up. I made lyrics up. Vincent was an amazing instrumental, and at that point, the early point, Trajan Thika was an amazingly adventurous drummer and percussionist.
Yeah.
And so it's like we were exploring kind of multimedia presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
And breaking down musical barriers so that you might have some classical stuff in there over the top of what would be otherwise an R&B number, and bringing in as many influences as we could. Right at the beginning, which was before the Beatles got interested in that.
Okay.
So we would draw on Spanish music, Indian music, because that was, there was an outlet for that in England.
Right.
And then we'd had sort of world music in the charts in England since about 1958.
Okay.
And I think there was also a hit in America, one from Africa called Tom Hark.
Okay.
And it was Elias and his Zigzag Flutes.
Okay.
Was the band, and that was a big influence on a lot of people, and stuff coming through the for that generation.
Yeah.
The kind of stuff that was sent back to their family by troops in the Suez Canal.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes it would be music that was popular out there, not English people out there.
Yeah.
And so that was all blended in the music.
Interesting.
And so it was like, well, a lot of even say there was one orchestra, jazz orchestra and light popular jazz, and he was called Joe Loss, and he was very, very famous in England. And I remember going on his show with the Crazy Will, and he said, well, what everybody is talking about, what will you do next? And I had what I called a ballad, but I think he thought I meant a ballad like Delilah, or one of those. It wasn't. It was like a space plucks the planets.
Oh yeah, from Kingdom Come.
Yeah,
right.
And that was going to be the next single.
Okay.
Because Kit Lambert, who obviously did the Who and Hendrix stuff on track, he always used to say, your audience will expect you to have advanced. And so he was keen to use that one because it had a nice melody and with strings, and it wasn't with like we did it in Kingdom Come, with the organ. It was a much different kind of thing. But Joe Loss, that the leader of the band show on the English radio, I said, well, I'm going to do a ballad.
Yeah.
And he said, a ballad? So I thought you'd come to change all that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Along with the Floyd and all of those other people. But he was referring to me in that moment. And so it was that was a thing where people who had spent the whole of their life playing in a certain style and mastering it, and being acknowledged most of it, heard this stuff now. Some of them, as did Frank Sinatra when he first heard Presley, and they said, what do you think of rock and roll, Frank? And he says, I can't remember the exact words, but it's a slimy ruffian in the gutter. I don't ask me to sing rock and roll. It's like,
oh, Frankie.
But that was the case with this kind of music that came out, because it had all electronic adventure in it as well, through particularly particularly through the Floyd, but through a lot of other people were also exploring that.
Yeah, I think the Residents would even be a good early example of that. I think that's their name. There's like an early,
yes,
yeah,
indeed, yeah. And you know, the Keith Emerson had the Nice, and with the Nice he was exploring already the synthy electronic end of things.
Yeah.
So it there were all those sort of changing points of view on music, and and if you look at it from a you know, that was part of the birth of prog music. And of course one of the great prog bands was Queen. And they brought in other things from, you know, different cultures, but they must have heard these experiments going on. And you know, because I know that, for instance, we, with my second band Kingdom Come, we were top of the bill, and this was the first night that Queen had played in a major, and so they were bottom of the bill. And so there was all this listening and saying, oh, we could, you're allowed to do that now, the audience will take it. So
I see. Okay.
They got the idea of experimentation partly from hearing all these bands that were experimenting. And so there was that going on. There was the fact that if you look at Fire as a hit, then one of the reasons that it was a hit was that when Track Records went over to America with the single and the album, the record company, which was Atlantic, were not keen on the kind of way our drummer Drayson Thieker was approaching rhythm. And so Lambert came back and said, what are we going to do? You know, we've got all of this recorded, and in those days you recorded, you could have a vocal recorded on the same track as the keyboard. And you didn't have modern technology as per now. You could lift the voice off. So if you wanted, suddenly thought, well, we put on the brass, but now I can hardly hear the voice.
I'm sweating thinking about being an engineer during that time, by the way.
Well, you know, Kit Lambert was, he would sort of walk in and the number would be nice and clean, and he'd just get hold of the slider and go into distortion and over volume drive, and you know,
wow. There
and,
you know,
and our drummer Drayson at that point, later it was Carl Palmer, of course, when we did the third American tour, but he used to love the early Wendy Carlos and Stockhausen, all the so I remember at the end of Fire, he just sat there and listened to it, and he said, it sounds tame. And so Lambert said, what? what well, if you think it's tame, you psychedelic gypsy, then just tell us, because they used to wear those clothes, you know. Just tell how you would make it sound not tame, wild, which we go wild. And so Drayson would say, yes, play the tape backwards. And he goes, Kit said, what? He said, I play the tape backwards. And he said, Jason, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'm going to have a backwards kick drum.
Okay.
On the last verse and the play out. He said, that's lifting, because you'll get
yeah, right.
Instead of and so Lambert said, well, Jason, we've experienced your speeding up and slowing down. It'll probably take us several months to get you playing exactly right.
Yeah.
Backwards, and so he says that Jason says, stick the album on, and yeah. So it said, oh, all right, and he played it, and it took him one take, and that's amazing. What we've got. So that's great. It was his perception of sound,
yeah,
and he also, which we didn't use, he also said, rest cure. That there's a ballad there. Well, it's an R&B rock, almost Tamla thing.
Yeah.
When this world is getting you down, and you can't seem to find the right place, and your friends are letting you down, and
right.
So he said, now, it's great. It mixes, rock and kind of American soul-y type music, which I haven't heard before. But it's still, if you listen to the rest of the album, it's tame. It's tame again.
Yeah.
And so Lambert said, "Oh, not again." and he said, "What would you do this time, Dracian?" And he said, well, every snare beat would be a broken bottle.
It's an expensive snare beat.
You're going to smash a bottle on each beat.
Hope you had a big beer budget that month. That's
so
funny.
He never did.
Yeah,
we didn't do.
Right.
Yeah, which would have sounded great, actually, I think. So you had the electronic style of music creeping in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
That were not just like, the creation of
I was actually gonna. I don't know if you're saying that, but I was gonna bring up the theremin. Like that would be, maybe the one gimmicky kind of, electro thing that worked its way into several different styles and groups and whatnot. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is there was this more sort of, under the surface sea change, right, in the sonic quality of the music.
Yes.
But and just one more thing about, because when you were talking about recording, it's interesting. It makes me think about how you had to be well rehearsed enough, or just confident enough to let's say lay down things well enough in one take, due to the fact you had a limited amount of tape and tracks and all that stuff. But so that like that's either good or bad depending on if you're prepared or not. But on the flip side, the examples you're furnishing on because of the limitations, people had to get way more creative with breaking ground with like new techniques and sounds and stuff. So even pressing down on the tape or playing the drums backwards or anything like that, it's almost as if it forced everyone, I would imagine, to be more creative in a manual analog sense than they would have to be now with digital recording.
Yes, it did, and then you got the rather insane record producers with an insane band.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in my next band, we did a fair amount of recording in Rockfield, which is Kingsley Ward and his brother, and it was the guy who was leading the exploration of sound there was Dave Edmonds, the rock.
Okay. Yeah.
But he's a phenomenal man in terms of sound itself.
Yeah.
And so we we spent, you know, you're right, you have to know how to play it so you can take it in one take, which means that you have to play it until it sounds like you want it to in the studio.
Yes.
So sometimes that might take you 3 hours to get the sound to where, okay, we're all now playing exactly as we should to make this sound the best it, and so it was at one moment like that, and we're just ready to go in, that Kingsley suddenly leapt up, and he was in his Wellington boots, and he said, well, now, lads, I got to go and milk the cows. And so we milked we were waiting in the studio, and one of the tapes got left on.
Oh shit!
So we get, Kingsley comes back, and we're about, and suddenly he goes, "Where's the end of this tune? Where is?" And the engineer, his assistant, had seen this thing flailing around, you know, when it came to the end of the tape.
Yeah, it's just right.
Oh, no. and it had got all, you know, bent up and cracked.
Oh man!
So he got his little pair of scissors and cut it off. And so when he said, when Kingsley said, "Where's the end of this tape?" He said, "It's in the bin, Kingsley." So Kingsley goes over to the bin, and so he goes like, "Okay, give me your scissors," and he goes, and so the keyboard player, who I used to have many talks with about the role of silence in the music itself, you know, the gaps between things and notes and sections, and so he said, "Okay, give me the scissors." He said, "Arthur, you remember last night we were talking about gaps in silence and everything?" So we have on one number in Galactic Zoo album where that's that.
That's that piece of tape.
I so it's so funny because I heard that the other day when I was getting acquainted with it, that it was kind of like an anthology collection. I wasn't like doing it per album, but I think I got to that song and I noticed it and I was like, I'm not listening to a CD, so this isn't skipping. And I was like, it sounds like they deliberately did this, and I don't hate it. I just don't understand why it's happening right now. Oh, that's awesome.
You know, that's, and then somebody else will hear that and make it something they actually do with the music.
Right.
And so
that's funny.
It was all happening like that, fun and adventure and laughing. You know, you could,
it's wonderful.
It was played. It was we've failed in our duty on the album notes, and we haven't given credit to the cows.
You're right. He's like shaking off the milk, you know, and then he's, you know, that's hilarious. Oh man, I want to record an album on it for him.
So there were all those going on. And when Fire was a hit, Lambert tried to get the record in on the underground stations in America.
Okay.
Now you'd think they would straight away jump on it, but for them it was not the kind of psychedelia they were used to hearing.
Yeah.
So they turned it down. So he went to the major stations that were not the underground stations. The AM instead of FM, and said, "I've got a novelty record. Would you like to hear it?" And because of all the war in Vietnam and everything, they said, well, we'll give it a spin. There's people, I think, who might relate to it, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And of course they did. They all played it.
Yep.
And then Hendrix, because he was on Track Records,
Hmm.
he went round all the, what were called then the black stations, the soul stations, the
Hmm.
R&B stations, and said, he threw it on the you know, with me in my makeup on the and said, play that. And they all played. So Lambert managed to get all the different kinds of musical places in America, all the different styles of station, who would normally just take this style or that style. He had them all playing there.
Right.
So it shot up to number 2, and it was only kept out by the Beatles.
Oh, pesky Beatles. And not the kind you step on. Well, you know, that's, I mean, what a what a great reason to, you know, to be bumped down, you know.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Also, I think what's funny about that too is talking about that, you know, so for anyone listening, AM would have been what FM is today, and that's where I guess most of the popular music was, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like ironic that he's like, all right, I guess I'll go to the, you know, the popular hit radio format to see if it'll work there, and, you know, like as a secondary choice instead of like, you know what I mean? That's amazing. It's like, oh, okay, this didn't work in the underground, so let's go with the popular, you know. That's awesome.
Yeah, rather, yeah, they were really good track, because whenever anything came up that was a problem, they would just go, right, okay. Instead of trying to hide it or go to, they'd just say, that's our ticket, right?
Yeah.
You've just said you can't play it because of that. And now we're going to make it even more like that, and then you'll have to play it,
right?
You know, and that was how they succeeded with a lot of their, you know, their hit records.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the underground can be like that. They want to make it more sort of a small community sometimes. So sometimes if it's too mass appeal, it's not cool enough for something in the world, you know. And I think that still holds true today.
Yes,
it's very high school, you know.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear about how you were hoping things would be perceived with a record like Fire, and then the actual response you get to it. Did you set out to kind of shock people, and it kind of turned into this whole career-long thing of this new genre of music, and or whenever it first came out, was the response different than how you had hoped it would be?
Well, you know, every band's first album is what they've been thinking about. And they put that into the music, and some can, you know, take that into a whole career, for starting with that. And my parents were both psychologically affected by the war. You know, my father was out bombing people, which he didn't want to do.
Yeah, right.
And he was psychic, so he could feel people dying and everything, and it was, you know, it was painful. So that caused kind of disturbances in the family. And so one day my father came back and he said, I brought a man who's going to teach you to empty your mind. And he said, because I know you were having a difficult time in this family. So that ended up with me doing that, and gradually other things and things involved with it, which was a form of meditation. And that spread over into, after the war, that was before TV and everything. You'd spend I would spend a lot of time in comparative silence. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking. And so you'd find amusement in, the fire in the grate. What happens with that? Let's watch it. and you go through the layers of the fire into the center of it, where it's almost stationary and it's no longer, blue and green and all the flames that come out. It's nearly white or gold.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the same kind of stillness that comes with meditation. So they two interlock. And so by the time I came to do my first album, that kind of thing was what I wanted to put into the record. And so when I wanted to do it, I thought, well, this is kind of strange. And so I wrote some of the tunes, and then we played them, and the band was already multimedia and singing songs like Nightmare was one of the ones that I wrote, which is quite, unusual in its form and for those days. And so we'd play, I remember playing the Stockbrokers Club, where the owner came around and sprayed us with deodorant while we were playing. Oh, those hippies. And people, I noticed people were not being able to relate to it. And so I thought, oh, okay, right. Well, if I make this a character, then I can put clothes on it. And then when I sing it, they'll realize it's something different about this. But and so that became the birth for me of the theatrical rock. And I've forgotten where we started this.
No, I think you made some really good points. Do you think that putting the character is what helped the audience relate to it? They were able to. It wasn't another person so much that they could relate to, but it was this kind of. I'm into like Carl Jung, so you're like this archetype kind of guy up there that's saying this other message that maybe it's not as comfortable to come from someone that looks more normal.
Yeah, and then for instance, the god of Hellfire, I didn't have the sort of crown type thing, but I did have a plate with petrol with things, the flames coming out, burning petrol, and that was more like, oh, there's a guy on stage, and he's saying, "Wow, I'm the god of Hellfire." Whew. But then it was backed up by other characters that were, the gods in costume. So, that's how that came about. And Pete Townshend came down and saw us, and he wanted to do a demo of it. So he did a demo of it. Because he wanted to get Kit and Chris involved with it, with the record company, and that would lead onwards to their agency and their management. And so he did the demo of the album, and then became co-producer with Lambert. And he was he was fully into the whole idea that, okay, it's got poetry, it's got operatic repeating themes all in it.
Well, and also probably maybe even touched on territory that he was going to go into later on, with like Tommy and Quadrophenia and all that stuff, right? So I think he probably was like a kindred spirit, seeing, that like Arthur's got this vision and I see it, maybe 3/4 of as much as he sees it, but I get it. And, let's kind of get this in a format where it can become a nice body of work. And you guys really seem to have a great community during all these years, let's say from, when you started and through the 70s. It seems like there was a lot of a helpful spirit among all these peers of yours. Is that accurate?
Yes, and and Pete was called sort of the closest one, obviously, because he had, like you say, he had his own vision. At that time, it was already beginning to be born. I think it was called Rail then, and it was about China.
Mhm.
And he gradually morphed it into Tommy. So,
Okay, yeah.
but the brass sections and things like that were things that he enjoyed, and the strings,
Yeah.
on the Fire album. And so, yeah, it was a part in that whole
Yeah.
move.
Which we know this, but for the audience, Arthur is in Tommy in the movie. He's one of the priests during the Marilyn Monroe healing scene, and it's very entertaining. I remember being 14 and being like, "Who is this crazy guy?" I knew who Clapton was, but and then I see you jumping around, and I was like, "That is interesting." I don't know what's happening there, but I like it. But like, even talking about Tommy for a second with I don't know if this is what you were getting at, but even the instrumentation and the arrangement in a lot of that, of course, it's got to be like, larger than life, theatrical, Broadway, leaning kind of stuff, I guess, for the whole thing to work. So you add elements, I guess, that you wouldn't normally have. But what a departure for them, even at least the music they did for the film. There's like a lot of very non-Who type of sound going on there, I feel.
Well, actually, and this is kind of borne out in various interviews that Pete did.
Mm-hmm.
He was taking this rail thing, and he wanted a singer that was kind of operatic,
Mm-hmm.
as well as rock. And so it was being written for me at the beginning.
Okay.
And then
Wow.
Lambert said, no, Pete, as far as when we come to, but by the time he'd made it Tommy,
mm-hmm.
he said, no, you can't have Arthur sing that lead. It's got to be a Who tune.
Okay.
It's got to be a Who tune. That's where the Who are now.
Yeah.
And that's the songs that you've written. You have to go. And so that's how it ended up in the end. And
interesting.
I had a disagreement with one of the people in the recording team. So my part was I was online for, I think, about 3 of the parts.
Okay.
I would have had one of them. One was the Pinball Wizard. One was
oh, interesting.
Was it Jack Nicholson? Not Jack Nicholson. Yeah. So it moved in that direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought Pete Townshend was just amazing what he managed to, when you read, if you do read his account of what was going on in his mind, what he was actually indicating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite amazing indeed.
Yeah. He seems like a very deep thinker. And
yeah.
I think his art definitely reflects that for sure.
Yes.
And I think he's not, I mean, it's public knowledge, but I think he's had like a lot of trauma and stuff too. So I think there's a lot of things that are very not quite blatant in there, or yeah. So we'll just leave it at that. But yeah, it's I'm sure there was a lot of sort of I'm sure there was as therapeutic as it was a creative effort for him.
Yes.
Interesting. 2 things. Just one quick side note. Kit Lambert sounds like he was very deliberate and always had a vision in terms of what he was trying to, who he was trying to guide and all that. That's interesting to learn that decisions that wound up being codified as like, this is now history, where, as they always are, we're guided by someone's oversight.
Well, there was another guidance in there on in terms of Fire, which was that we had the another record which was about Give Him the Flower, and that was taking the whole idea of sticking a flower in and making fun of it like a music hall piece. So we had a lot of comedy in our. We were about
Yes.
50% comedy, and so when we were on the first tour of America, I got an email from Pete Townshend saying, Kit and I have been discussing and arguing about whether we're going to go for the big push on the dark side of your image,
Okay.
or on the comedy side.
Yeah.
And they've eventually decided that they were going to be able to get more traction on the darker side.
Interesting. An interesting choice in that time and place, in terms of like that was not necessarily a popular theme, right? You would maybe occasionally have songs with a darker content, like a lover kills a lover or someone dies in a car accident or whatever, but there wasn't, other than Screaming Jay Hawkins, which we can circle back to in a minute. But there wasn't yet, like honestly, before, I mean, and what the hell do I know, but before him and yourself, there wasn't maybe any kind of particular theme at all, but like a dark, I don't want to say horror, but spooky or spiritual type of thematic thing going on in music. So that's an interesting choice to make, maybe being conscious of that and just being like, yeah, let's go with the dark side because no one's doing that. And that, that could be like a good idea or a total roll of the dice.
Yeah. I think they did have, a sense of what was bubbling under in the whole of the art world, and the consciousness that was coming over and blending with ours, I suppose, from America,
Yeah.
And all the and so that gave them now's a time that might be received well, and received for a serious piece, not just a throwaway piece.
Sure. Well, he certainly directly affected a lot of successors that came later, in terms of a performing type of appreciation, whether that be Alice Cooper or people of that description. Fascinating stuff.
Do you think part of that is the cultural history that England had? So you have people like yourself whose parents fought in World War II and dealt with all the ramifications of the war, and then you have, around the time of the psychedelic movement, you have Vietnam going on, and then you have this youth that's really kind of fed up with these systems of war and oppression, and you kind of embrace the absurdity of life. And that's why people like yourself and these darker undercurrents in music really kind of got popular. I feel like that you have this big cultural shift in what's allowable to be talked about.
Yeah, I think it had got pushed away because in the English, and there were clubs, working men's clubs. There were all sorts of ones, and you had a music that went with it, and a lot of that did have a dark side. They were looking at things that were everyday things, but were not going to be approached by the radio that's promoting, two children and a house and a car and a television. Life is great, they wanted to. Yeah, and they, so from the music hall, you had all those songs about the worms come in and the worms go out. They come in thin and they go out stout. Ooh, you, which is worms coming into a corpse. And
right.
So all of those, all of those kind of things were a part of an undercurrent of England that wasn't allowed into the family entertainment. So much, but it was there, and I saw it. And so it's like, why not include all of that instead of just taking part of life and saying that's what you need to look at only.
It worked for Black Sabbath too, because they're of the exact same description, where they're all growing up in Birmingham, in a city that got a lot of action, let's say, during the war, and they're all working class and pissed off and want to get out of that town. Probably, I think it's what a lot of them were feeling, and boy, did they succeed. But I mean, but yeah, I mean, that's another great example too. I think because that still would have been popular music, and certainly in America, right? Because I think '69 was the first Black Sabbath album. So
yeah,
it's funny how that was, and I think it's good how that was eaten up by the public, as it should be. You know what? There's a parallel even to 1980s to 90s rap in that sense. You have all these
yes,
people being the representatives of either impoverished or gang controlled or crime rampant neighborhoods that don't have a lot of good options, and they're pissed off and no one knows or cares about them. And then you have these people talking about it, it's kind of like reporters from the inside. So I think that was almost like a second wave of what we're talking about.
yes.
And people do connect with it, obviously.
Yeah, and at the same time, you had the whole questioning of well, is the body is something that is evil?
Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of the I don't think all of them knew, but a lot of the church people were at least tinged with that, and difficult to get beyond it.
Yeah.
And if it's things to do with the body, like talking about blood flowing around in your veins, and dim bones, dim bones, dim bones.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're getting into an area that most people don't want to think about.
Yeah.
Instead of it being the first thing you get taught, because it's always there from when you're born.
Yeah.
And so that whole darkness covered a lot of different limitations on people's capacity to think freely.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about being part of a thought experiment. Being in music and exploring that, and then seeing how people react to it, both favorably and negatively. And
yes,
interesting sort of position to be in that probably you didn't intend to be in, right?
No, and it was done. It spread out from a place where that's what it was.
Yeah,
a thought experiment. How do we have to think in this way? If we don't think this way, what does that mean by what's being built by thought? All of that, structure of society and everything, which they pretty soon were not able to tolerate.
Right.
The government, and even in England, people were put in jail for 7 years.
Yeah.
And they did manage to make a big hole in it all, which could have produced some really interesting changes in things.
Sure.
I think a lot of the thinking still went on.
Oh yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've obviously come a long way since then. I mean, something like like a Kent State, I mean, look, there's been a billion tragedies since then, right? So I'm not saying like, oh, that hasn't happened again. Like bad things have happened, but I think that the kind of rift between government and society started to change a little bit as far as pop culture helping everyone maybe think a little bit more openly, and then maybe sometimes nowadays we go too far in the other direction, but I think there has been a lot of positive ramifications of that. It's just unfortunately a lot of people had to suffer to get to that point, or perish, unfortunately, but
I think Pete Townsend had a quote that rock and roll could save the world. And do you agree with that, Arthur, that rock and roll has saved the world, or it's on the way to saving the world, or that kind of mindset is going to help?
I think it's a good place for exploring whether it will help it, because there's so much else going on, and a lot of rock and roll is still gentlemen's clubs. you've got to be the right sort of person to get in it, and you've got to do the right things in there to stay up in the charts and everything.
Yeah.
And I think that, that sort of one of the antitheses is that was, the whole rap and that kind of approach to things. It's still the fact that no matter what limitations are put on people through technology, and AI is now, one of the main concerns.
Oh yeah.
Then there's always going to be people who won't be pulled down by it.
Sure.
There may not be as many, and the problem is if there aren't enough, it gets squashed into a particular shape. So there was a point where rock and roll came along. It did shake everything up, and then there was a whole period where that disappeared into its opposite, really.
There's commercialism.
Vast sums of money.
Yeah,
just unbelievable, and the use of the media.
Yeah.
To conceal the fact that this album at #1 or single hasn't actually sold anything. It's actually been put into a truck. 40 trucks that drive up and down the motorways because it's what comes out of the warehouse. At a certain point in the history of it all, it was what came out the warehouse as being bought that went in the charts. So you had records up the charts that nobody had bought. They were still being driven up and down. Well, they had, but it was all by one person who was putting them in and waiting for their record company to go up to #1. And there's all of that still happening with the new medias and everything. It's
Well, let's talk about that for a second, like with new media, because I'm curious to get your opinion on, if you have any specific thoughts on this kind of stuff. So we're in a day and age of streaming now where it's a lot easier to access all this stuff, assuming you have internet or cellular connection wherever you go, right? So like that's convenient, and arguably anything you're going to want to listen to, it has been transferred into that format so you can listen to it. But the flip side is, the artists don't make hardly anything, which stinks. And but then there's also the aspect of, like Jeremy and I can attest to this, there's not the same gatekeepers that there were to put music out in the ether. So we both have music up on Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff, because now it's a matter of just using certain platforms, and we all do our own recording and engineering and stuff like that, not necessarily mastering, although Jeremy does. So that's great, but do you have thoughts on where music has gotten to in that regard, and do you think there's both good and bad, or more of one than the other?
I do. What I'd like to do is just see if Claire wants to come and say something, because she's involved in all that.
Yes,
I can say what I can say, but
sure.
Just hold on a second.
Yes, and while Arthur is getting we're referring to the lovely Claire Waller, who is Arthur's management and PR and social, and wears many hats, and she is also responsible for getting us all together today. So a nice shout out to or introduction for Claire.
So here's Claire.
The lovely Claire. Hello.
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 We have dingly danglies above our heads.
Yeah, I like the dingly danglies.
So could you repeat the question? And then
yeah, of course. So Claire, I was asking Arthur about, we kind of in our conversation just slightly segued into stuff with modern music, and I was saying I was wondering what his opinion was, and of course as well yours, because you're in the thick of it, of where modern music has gotten to today, in the sense that streaming's convenient for the listener, and you can kind of get access to whatever you want, arguably. but the artists don't, get paid as a result as well, just because of the way the models change. But then on the flip side, also, it's easier to put music out there. As an artist, I was saying, Jeremy and I have stuff up on Spotify and Apple Music. It's just a matter of getting the right distributor and putting together the stuff. We record ourselves and produce ourselves and blah, blah, blah. So there's like that side of it too, where there's not the same barrier to entry. But was curious to see what your thought was on all that, being steeped in all this, and then also dealing with promoting Arthur, who's from a different time to now, and the changes.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's really interesting because we set out on this journey together probably 7 years ago.
Okay.
So it's been a case of building Arthur's, it's a horrible word, but brand, if you like, of what is his calling card is fire. And what he struggles with is the fact that he has this kind of one-hit wonder label surrounding fire, and yet Arthur has this really extensive back catalogue. So, and has constantly made different genres of music, which also makes it tricky. So what we did, and I think really the sort of key to this, and what we're really starting to see shift now and move, and hopefully fingers crossed it will work, is that within music, for want of a better word, geeks who really love history of music, archives, really know the chronology of you too. The chronology of music and how things link together. Arthur sits right in that, and it is recognized with, the classic, oh, he's a legend, he's an icon, he's a shock rock king. But what does that mean? So with Spotify, we have gone with Arthur Brown because Arthur has morphed and continues to morph and is connected to many, many very classic artists. So where Spotify, I think, is great is somebody like Arthur has a platform to connect. I was a real music geek before being with Arthur, and you sit there and you go, oh, I wonder what that is. So he pops up. So we've had lots of interesting sort of young people doing the have you heard this track, they sit with the cans and you watch their face.
The reaction videos, right?
you still see the reaction and the response to the song, so there is something still vibrant and connected to audience with that. But we are connected with labels. There's 3 labels. There's Cleopatra, Magnetic Eye and Prophecy, and Cherry Red, right? And
Ian McNulty,
right? Arthur is Ian McNulty, he's connected with many people, but trying to get the whole thing to join up. And then there's Klaus Schultz, there's all the Hawkwind, massive, very important, Alan Parsons, all really important artists. And Arthur is right in there. And up until now, I don't think he's really had the recognition that he deserves, and the sort of understanding of who he really is. So what those platforms are allowing is the growth in that. And I really watch all the stats. So I've watched the audience demographic change over the period of time. And what is happening is the younger audience are reaching his music. And as the time goes by, so more of the back catalogue is being released. So Dance comes out at the end of the month via Cherry Red. Then there's all the sort of arrangements through Cleopatra with Brian Auger, all the different people, Vanilla Fudge. Who else was involved in that? I mean, lots of really, really important artists. So it's both a curse and a blessing, but how to connect to people, it's magnificent. We've just launched the new tour t-shirt, and I was sat with the guy I work with is Marvin in Germany. He's 21, and we both, I sit here typing away. He's like, and then we launched it, and then you're watching the globe where it's going.
Yeah,
And to
right.
me, that's fantastic. You know,
Sure.
Brazil, Portland, all sorts of places all over the world, Germany.
Yeah.
So, you know, for me, the digital aspect really is the money. It's criminal what they're paying artists.
Right.
But there is no doubt that if you're about artistry, creativity, and wanting to share your music, then it's fabulous, you know. But
sure,
there is, how does that relate to live performance now? How does it relate to vinyl, to CDs, to because, you know, an artist survives by selling their merch at a gig, because the gigs are so difficult now, and then travel. So if you try to fight it and you don't embrace it and you don't see what the beauty of it is, you're missing a whole, you will become a dinosaur and you won't exist. And you know, we've had loads of connections with there's a young rapper in Atlanta that Arthur's done a track with, and the guy that's produced that and created it is a young guy in London, and he's only 25.
Amazing.
And to me, that's the beauty of it all. And Arthur has always been somebody who's always believed in technology. Yeah. So, and trying to be one step ahead in electronic sound, and so all of it is, to me, it's, you can't, if you work against things, you're not going to succeed. So the labels that we have connection with we really value them, because without that, you're just pushing. There are ways to do it, and I do think the digital platforms now allow people to start their careers and create. But certainly for us, it's almost like a rebirth, isn't it, for you? I mean, last year there were 2 albums out. I mean, great. And the fact that it's there digitally, why would you want to deny an access to? And then, you know, what happens if you've got it all connected in your platforms there? Oh, go to the website. Hey, I never knew that about Arthur. And then, of course, there's all this stuff starts to come out. That's, it's, and it would never do that without that kind of forum, you know.
I mean, nor would we be having this conversation, you know, because I wouldn't have known how to get in a, well, I mean, you know, I would have went to the website, of course, but I'm just saying, you know, we wouldn't have maybe had the kind of the initial facilitation that we did. And you know, even like listening to Long Long Road, for example, right? So like one of the last 2 albums, like I was able to pull it up on Spotify and just kind of dive in and sort of see where you know, Arthur's music was out now, which that's like, now that's in my top rotation. But
it's a beautiful album.
It really is. And it's just, you know, side note, sonically too, it's great because it's refreshing, but then it also sort of has like a sonic quality of something that would have been cut years ago. You know, it kind of almost sounds like a record in numerous ways, but it's also like a frequency thing. And I just really, really enjoy that. And so both from a artistic and then personnel point of view, like I think you guys also work with very talented people as well. Absolutely. Both musicians and producers and engineers and all that stuff. So kudos to them as well. And I just want to say, kind of to put a button on something that you were saying in the beginning about the, unfortunately, like zoomed in narrow perspective on like Arthur's perception when we're talking about sort of modern platforms like Spotify and Apple and stuff. Is like Jeremy and I were just getting aligned and prepared on stuff in our notes last night, and he knows this, but I'm just sharing what we were discussing. I was like, we may as well be talking to Paul McCartney tomorrow. I just wanted to remind you of that, you know. So whatever we clip from this episode, like that, I wanted to say that so it's clear to anyone that comes across this that you know, we still have a living legend among us, and there's more great things to come. I hope so. By the way, Jeremy and I will throw our hat in the ring to collaborate with you, Arthur, if you hear that. If you want to do a song with us or us a song with you, please consider us.
That's the beauty of Arthur. He does, you know, it's, and we're both like that. Neither snobby. Is it is it fun, as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
you got to have fun, and Arthur's great at bringing fun. We've got a collaboration with some guys in Peru, but we haven't managed to bring that to fruition yet. But that was done. Lockdown was a great time to
Sure.
really experiment with technology of what you can do, remotely from each other. So that was really good. But yeah, I'm really grateful for the interview, because the mission
please.
Arthur gave me when we set out together was, because I always say to him, like in Lucifer, and he says, "What is it you most desire?" I say, what is it you really want? What is it you're wanting from this? And his answer was the recognition of a life in music, of it wasn't just that one hit wonder, it was a life spent creating as an independent, slightly, everyone labels him eccentric. He's very normal in a crazy way, but it's his persona on stage is outrageously extravagant, but he's a very quiet soul. He's not so really, if Arthur becomes known for his creativity and his music rather than just his flaming helmet, which I love, I think it's inspired, and you watch it light on a show and everybody's face light up. It's worth it for for that.
Of course. Well, and that's it's funny you say that that your bit about sort of his personality. Sorry, Arthur, we'll stop kissing your ass in 2 minutes. I have something else to say.
I love theory.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna pucker up here. No, but watching the Ian McNulty interview, which I was saying to Arthur was like a big helpful research point to us, like all 3 parts of it, in fact, because I was struck by, when I was watching it, I was just kind of like sitting down on the couch, just as like late at night while the kids are in bed and everything. I'm like, all right, let me, sort of dig in and get a little info. And I was just like glued to the video, because he has such a great memory and way to articulate maybe very long and complicated subjects and swaths of time. So that was another thing I was like, oh, it would be so great to speak to him, and then we can kind of maybe ask some additional thoughtful questions and get more out of him, where the world can see more of that. So I totally agree. It's like a very a part of him, I think, that we would both like to see more of him out there and about, in the ether.
It's a life lived.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's it. It's a kind of, he's colorful character, because he's just followed it. He's followed the music, and there is really no more of an expectation than that. Yeah. So
very inspiring.
It's and certainly I think the story is his age, really. Where anybody at that age who can still stand on a stage and command the presence that he does.
Yes.
That's it.
Incredible.
That's artistry and professionalism. And
we probably spent about 12 to 15 minutes just talking about the quality of his voice at the beginning of the interview, just because it's that impressive that anyone after even 20 years has that kind of quality in their voice, matching it to when they first started singing like that. So it's so impressive.
Well, he sings every day and very clean living. So it's
that's great.
No smoking, no drinking, and Tai Chi, walking, very simple life.
Right. That's unbelievable. An inspiration to us all, Claire,
I'm gonna have to go for it.
Yeah. Before you run, I just want to, we'll put all this stuff when we put the video up. We'll put a ton of this stuff in the description, but godofhellfire.com is the website, and all of the socials will be linked to from there, but we'll put every piece of information that we have on Arthur socially in our description. So Albert Hall.
I mention the Albert Hall? That's a big one.
Let's talk about Albert Hall quick. Royal Albert Hall,
29th of September with Hawkwind, and the two bands on the main Albert Hall. Should be amazing. And quite a few friends coming, big celebration. So
that's great. That's exciting.
Amazing.
It is exciting.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. All right. So keep an eye out for Arthur Brown at Royal Albert Hall on September 29th.
Mm-hmm.
Get your tickets.
And he's
now.
coming back now to say
Okay,
goodbye
great.
to you.
Okay.
Okay, bye guys.
Thank you so
very
much, Claire. It was lovely
Where
talking
are
to
you in America?
Jeramy is in Aurora, Colorado, close to Denver, and I'm in Connecticut.
Did we go to Connecticut?
I'm sure we did with Carl.
We went all over the place, but
Come back and visit. Let me know when you're coming. I'll host you.
Okay, we're trying to get to America. We've got really good friends with the LPR, in New York.
Yes, that's right. We have a mutual friend. Yep.
Yeah, so we've got a gig there, but it's now it's the visas trying to get a tour that will accommodate bringing the whole band.
Of
we
course,
have this show that we've rehearsed. So someone contacted about Austin, so maybe slowly we'll do it next year.
Okay,
Yeah,
fantastic,
that'd be amazing.
Fantastic.
We'll come see you wherever it is.
Yeah, please. Bye,
Yeah.
Claire.
Please do.
So, Arthur, we don't want to take up too much more of your time, so
Okie doke.
I think we would just like to just thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being a part of this, and we want to engage with you more, talk more. Maybe we can meet up at some point, but regardless, thank you for giving us some of your perspective on your career, music in general, all that good stuff. And we look forward to seeing more great things to come. So, hopefully this was a fun chat for you as well.
Yeah, it was. And there's a lot of ideas that you've introduced between both of you. And, when that happens, it's a nice thing to do, an interview.
Well, thank you again.
So, thank you.
It's amazing to talk with you.
Okay, well, let's do it again.
All right, absolutely. Please.
Would love to.
We've got a new album. We're just going in the studio in, I think, 8 days, and that's going to be the last touches on it.
Oh, great.
And
okay.
That we don't know when it's coming out yet.
Okay.
So
it's a full length.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Excellent.
Yeah, we'll definitely listen to that and promote it.
Do we have a title yet you're allowed to divulge? Or no?
No.
Okay. All right, good. That's fine. Yeah.
Finally decided yet.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Fair enough.
No.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, all right. Well, we'll be in touch, and good luck with wrapping that up, and good luck on the September 29th gig. That'll be a fun show, Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
You.
It's been a
Thanks
pleasure.
so much,
Take
Arthur.
care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Did you enjoy that episode? Yes? Would you like to see and hear more? Please like and subscribe, and you'll automatically receive notifications when we publish new episodes. Thanks for watching and listening to the WOAS podcast.